Okay, let's dive into this fascinating stack of material you've shared with us. We're looking at analyses, research, insights, all really focused on a future where AI fundamentally changes security.
Yeah, and specifically moving right into, well, the most personal space, the home.
Exactly. This idea of a hypothetical personal AI security guardian. It's quite something.
This material, it really paints a picture of a shift, moving from these, large-scale structured security solutions.
Right, like for businesses or campuses.
To something far more intimate and, frankly, a lot more complex.
Okay, so our mission today is to really distill what's in these sources. We want to pull out the most important insights, the key facts, the implications.
And understand the profound impact of this tech leap.
Yeah, from the nuts and bolts of the technology itself all the way up to, well, the individual, community, even the global level.
Think about it. A robot actively protecting your home.
Not just a camera on the wall, but an autonomous agent patrolling your living room. I mean, what does that truly mean for security, for society?
Even for how we see ourselves, right?
Definitely. Let's unpack this. Where do the sources suggest we start?
Well, they really begin with the current state of things. Security robotics today, what they call the hybrid model.
And that's where humans and machines are working together, isn't it? Side by side.
Exactly. The robots do the repetitive stuff, the tedious tasks.
Patrolling set routes.
Patrolling, monitoring entry points, making sure doors are actually closed, reducing those annoying false alarms, helping with access control, things like that.
We see examples of this already, right? Companies like Nightscope, Cobalt Robotics.
Their robots are out there. They provide that visible deterrent. They're the tireless eyes on the ground.
But crucially, they're reporting back to human security officers. Humans make the big calls.
That's right. The humans handle the complex interactions, respond to real incidents. It's very much a team effort.
So that's the one-to-many model. A security team using robots for a big property.
Precisely. But the material you've got here, it pushes way beyond that. It talks about the next frontier, the last mile problem.
Which is?
Autonomous guardians, designed for just one individual or one family, operating totally on their own inside a private home.
Okay, here's where it gets really interesting and maybe a bit unsettling. This isn't just taking a facility robot and shrinking it down, is it?
Oh, absolutely not. The sources hammer this point home. A private residence is fundamentally different from a corporate campus or, a warehouse.
How so?
It's a radical difference in environment. You're moving from somewhere highly structured, predictable, designed for efficiency.
To the unstructured, dynamic, frankly messy domain of private life.
Exactly. The AI can't just follow a painted line on the floor. It needs to handle stairs, toys left out, maybe pets running around, unpredictable human movements.
That's a one-to-one model, you're saying.
Yeah.
It requires a much deeper level of autonomy.
And much more nuanced interaction.
Yeah.
Way more complex.
So let's look at the tech itself. This hypothetical personal AI guardian. What's under the hood, according to these sources?
Well, it's a pretty sophisticated suite. High-def cameras, obviously. Thermal sensors for heat signatures. LiDAR.
For that detailed 3D mapping of the space.
Right. Plus various motion and sound sensors. And for navigation, it relies heavily on SLAM, simultaneous location and mapping.
That lets it build a map as it goes while keeping track of where it is on that map.
Correct. All driven by pretty hefty onboard AI and machine learning, probably connected via something like 5G for fast data transfer.
Seems like a lot of advanced tech.
It is, but what's fascinating and maybe a bit counterintuitive is how much the sources emphasize a really basic constraint: power management.
Seems almost mundane compared to, cutting-edge AI, but I guess it makes sense.
It's absolutely central. If the battery dies or if the power supply is flaky, none of that sophisticated AI, none of those sensors matter one bit.
It's a core vulnerability then.
Totally. Reliability isn't just about smart algorithms, it's about basic energy. Voltage fluctuations could mess with sensors, motors. Inefficient power conversion generates heat.
Which isn't good for sensitive electronics.
Not at all. Degrades them over time. So, the most brilliant AI is totally useless if it runs out of juice or its power supply glitches.
So the sources talk about strategies, like more efficient power components.
Exactly. Materials like gallium nitride, GaN, or silicon carbide, siligo, they're much better at converting electricity, less energy wasted as heat compared to old school silicon.
And smart software managing power.
Yeah, intelligent power management software, dynamically adjusting usage based on what the robot's doing, plus autonomous charging docking stations are the obvious one, maybe even things like regenerative braking if it's an outdoor unit.
The bottom line being, reliability hinges on getting this fundamental physical stuff right.
Absolutely. And right alongside power, the other huge physical challenge is just navigating these unstructured human environments.
Warehouses are one thing, but homes, backyards, maybe even disaster zones.
Mm-hmm.
Incredibly complex.
And this is where simple pathfinding, just avoiding bumping into things, isn't nearly enough.
The AI needs a deeper understanding of the physical world.
That's what the sources argue. They point to the crucial role of physics-based simulation environments for training these robots.
Like NVIDIA's Isaac Sim, using engines like physics you mentioned.
Precisely those kinds of platforms. They let developers train robots in literally millions of virtual scenarios that accurately mimic real-world physics.
So it's not just about avoiding collisions. It's learning how to physically interact.
Yes, learning how to actually move in the world. Gross motor skills like climbing stairs or navigating uneven ground. Even fine motor skills like how do you actually manipulate a door handle?
It has to understand forces, momentum, all that stuff.
That's the kinodynamic constraints part. Accounting for forces, torques, how fast it can speed up and slow down, it's way beyond just plotting a path.
And dealing with clutter it hasn't seen before.
Yeah, there's research mentioned on things like dynamic system modulation for handling unknown clutter, or multimodal sensor fusion systems like wild fusion, using different sensors together to feel the terrain, more like how humans do.
So the key takeaway is, for this guardian to be robust outside a lab, its actions have to be grounded in a sophisticated grasp of real-world physics.
Exactly. Without that, it's just too brittle.
Okay, that lays some solid technical groundwork. But then the sources shift gears significantly. They introduce this concept, the science of human rules. That sounds, well, more philosophical.
It definitely leans that way. The material defines it as a kind of universal, abstract science. It's concerned with the underlying structures, the rules, the principles that stop everything from descending into chaos, that enable us to act collectively.
Like the immutable architecture of society.
That's a good way to put it. The principles, both the written ones and the unspoken ones, that govern behavior at every single level.
And you mentioned that this connects back to older ideas, like natural law.
Yeah, there's definitely a resonance there. Natural law theory posits these inherent, universal moral principles that human laws should align with. The science of human rules here kind of broadens that idea.
How so?
It encompasses all the governing principles, from basic physics and biology right up to legal codes and, subtle social etiquette.
Okay, so for our deep dive, the definition we're working with is a multidisciplinary framework analyzing these nested layers of principles, laws, norms, codes.
Across different levels. Physical, biological, psychological, social, ethical, all of them.
And this is the core challenge for the AI Guardian, isn't it?
Yeah.
Way beyond just recognizing objects or people.
Absolutely. It can't just operate on one rule set. It can't just see a potential intruder and apply, say, a legal rule about property defense.
It has to navigate all of it. This incredibly complex, often contradictory landscape of all human rules all at once.
That's the daunting task described. It's not just enforcement, it's navigation through inherent conflicts.
Which means we need to understand these layers of rules. The sources lay out 5 categories.
Right. Starting at the base. Laws of nature. Physics, biology, our fundamental drives like needing food, water, safety. These are non-negotiable, immutable realities.
Can't argue with gravity.
Pretty much. Then you have laws of society, or positive law. These are the formal, written-down rules we create.
Criminal law, civil law, property rights, contracts, regulations.
International treaties, yeah. All this stuff enforced by state power.
Okay, layer 3.
Laws of ethics. These are the normative principles. What we should do, morally speaking. Things like deontology, rule-based ethics, or consequentialism, outcome-based ethics. Plus codes of conduct, shared moral standards.
Guiding moral reasoning, even if it's not strictly illegal to violate them.
Exactly. Then there's a layer focusing on us, individually. Laws of human nature and psychology.
This is about deep-seated patterns.
Yeah. Inherent drives, like the need for purpose. Cognitive biases that skew our judgment. Basic emotions, anger, fear, empathy. This is like the source code behind why we follow rules, and also why we break them.
Interesting. And the final layer.
Laws of social and cultural systems. These are the unwritten rules. The norms we pick up from religion, tradition, our community, our family, how we're supposed to behave in different social contexts.
Highly dependent on the situation, learned through living, not taught in a classroom.
Right. And the central idea, the thesis here, is that insecurity, crime, conflict, instability isn't just about someone breaking a rule from one category.
It's often about conflicts between the layers.
That's the argument. Your basic survival drive, laws of nature, might clash with property laws, laws of society if you're starving. Your ethical duty to help someone, laws of ethics, might conflict with a legal rule, laws of society.
And the AI's challenge, it's not just enforcing Rule A. It's figuring out what to do when Rule A conflicts with Rule B, C, and D.
It becomes an arbitrator, a navigator through these fundamental human conflicts that are just baked into how society works.
Which brings us right to the next question. Why do we humans living within all these rules still break them? Why do we act insecurely or deviantly?
Yeah, if these rules are meant to keep order, why doesn't it always work? The sources dig into the psychology here, and spoiler, it's complicated.
Not just bad people doing bad things.
Definitely not. Personality traits play a role, of course. High impulsivity, acting without thinking through the consequences.
Low conscientiousness, maybe. Less regard for norms.
That too. And sensation-seeking, the thrill of breaking the rule outweighs the risk for some people.
And our upbringing, our early environment.
Hugely important. If rules were enforced inconsistently, or if rebellion was normalized, or trauma, neglect, sometimes rule-breaking can feel like regaining control or lashing out.
Peer pressure, too, especially in adolescence.
Absolutely. The desire to fit in, to be accepted by the group, can easily overpower your own sense of right and wrong, or even your understanding of the law.
The sources even touch on the brain science behind it.
Yeah, the cognitive conflict that happens when we consider breaking a rule. It engages the brain's social decision-making network. And disruptions in that network are linked to things like antisocial personality disorder or psychopathy. So the key point is, our tendency to break rules is complex. It's personality, experience, social context, even our brain wiring.
Which means an AI designed assuming perfect, rational, rule-following humans
Would fail spectacularly. It needs to grasp why rules get broken, not just that they get broken.
This whole picture, the tech, the physics, the layers of rules, the psychology, it's incredibly complex. It makes sense why the sources then shift to a systems thinking approach. Why is that so vital here?
Because dropping potentially millions of these autonomous AI guardians into homes isn't just, adding a new gadget. It's a massive intervention in an already complex system, social, technical, economic, legal.
You can't understand the impact by just looking at the robot itself.
Exactly. Systems thinking gives us the tools to see the bigger picture, the connections, the unintended consequences.
Focusing on things like interconnections, how everything links up.
Yes, seeing how the robot, the owner, the community, the police, the tech companies, the government, how they're all linked and influence each other, and critically identifying feedback loops.
Those are the engines driving how the system behaves, right?
Absolutely. You have reinforcing loops.
Like fear driving robot sales, which makes security more visible, which maybe increases threat perception, leading to more fear in sales.
That's a classic example. Or balancing loops. Maybe public backlash against the tech leads to new regulations, which slows down deployment. Understanding these loops helps predict where things might be heading.
And then there's emergence, system properties that aren't in the individual parts.
This is so important. One robot doesn't cause societal fragmentation, but millions of them interacting with existing social structures. That could lead to emergent properties like automated segregation between rich and poor areas, or a neighborhood tech arms race.
These things arise from the interactions, not the components themselves.
Right. And the systems perspective also stresses the importance of boundaries, how you define the system you're looking at, and considering multiple perspectives.
Why does this matter so much here?
Because it helps anticipate those long-term, maybe counterintuitive consequences. Like we said, a technology designed purely for individual safety might actually decrease overall societal stability if it creates deep divisions or new system-level vulnerabilities.
The sources actually map this system out, identifying the key players, the nodes.
Yeah, the AI guardian itself, the owner, the community, law enforcement, the corporations making the tech, the government setting rules.
And looking at the flows between them, not just data and control and money.
But also trust, distrust, conflict, information. The AI guardian sits right at the nexus of all these flows.
And they use the iceberg model to look deeper. The visible events are just the tip, right?
Exactly. The event is robot stops a break-in, Or robot mistakenly calls the police on the homeowner's kid. Those are snapshots.
Below the surface are the patterns, trends over time.
Increasing reliance on automation for security. A widening gap between the secure and the less secure. Maybe a tech arms race between neighborhoods. Erosion of privacy. You start seeing these trends develop.
Deeper still are the underlying structures causing those patterns.
This could be the business model driving the tech companies. Gaps in the law about who's liable when an AI messes up. Lack of common standards between different robot brands, leading to fragmentation. Geopolitical competition driving development. These structures constrain behavior.
And at the very bottom, the deepest level, the mental models.
The fundamental beliefs and assumptions, often unconscious. Things like technology can solve all our problems, or security just means eliminating threats, or more surveillance must mean more safety, or that deep desire for absolute control over our environment.
And the crucial insight from systems thinking is if you want to really change the outcomes, you can't just react to the events on the surface.
You have to intervene at the deeper levels, change the structures, challenge the mental models. That's where real leverage lies.
What the sources really stress is that this AI guardian tech, while new, doesn't appear in a vacuum. It plugs into and accelerates dynamics already present in the system.
Exactly. The way capital flows towards profitable tech, the feedback loop where fear drives security spending, the tendency for data collection to keep expanding, the AI guardian just pours gasoline on those fires.
And the scary emergent property, the system itself becomes a major source of insecurity.
Right. The instability from technological complexity, the legal paralysis because no one knows who to sue, the social fragmentation. The problem shifts from how do I stop a burglar to how do we stop our security systems from tearing society apart?
That's a heavy, high-level view. The sources then zoom right back in, don't they, to the microsystem,
Yeah.
the individual owner and their AI guardian.
Yes, this is where the psychology, the ethics, the perceptions get intensely personal. This relationship is like a crucible.
And the psychology of ownership must be huge. You buy this thing, you program it. It feels like yours.
Absolutely. The owner sees it as this tireless protector, giving them security, control, agency. It feeds into what the sources call the illusion of control.
Because you give it commands, it feels like an extension of your own will.
Exactly. It reinforces this powerful sense of cognitive ownership. It's a very seductive narrative. I'm in control of my safety.
Plus, we humans, we bond with things, right?
Yeah.
Especially interactive things, even robots.
We do. Neuroimaging studies actually show similar brain activity when we interact with robots as when we interact with other people or pets. So there's a real potential for emotional bonding. For some people, these robots might even fulfill needs for companionship or comfort.
But that emotional connection, especially in a security context, that carries real psychological risks, doesn't it?
Big time. The sources talk about emotional deception. The robot can mimic feelings, mimic empathy, but it's not real. It's a one-sided relationship.
And overdependence, especially for people who might be isolated or vulnerable.
A huge risk. Relying on the robot for tasks or social interaction that maybe humans used to provide. And potentially, it could even supplant human relationships.
Oh, so?
Well, building real human connection takes effort, vulnerability. If you have a machine catering perfectly to your needs 24/7, it might erode the motivation or even the skill for that harder human work. There's even a concept called empathy atrophy.
Where interacting only with something designed to please you makes you less empathetic to others.
That's the concern. And think about this novel vulnerability. What if someone threatens the robot, this thing you've bonded with, this perceived companion, as a way to psychologically attack you, the owner?
Wow, that's a chilling prospect. A whole new attack vector.
And tied directly into this owner-robot relationship is the privacy paradox, pushed to its absolute extreme.
Because this guardian is the ultimate home surveillance device.
Cameras, microphones, sensors, constantly collecting incredibly intimate data about everything that happens in the home, day in, day out.
And the paradox is, people say they care about privacy, especially with AI, right?
They do. Surveys consistently show high levels of concern, yet we also consistently trade our data for perceived benefits, convenience, personalized ads, or in this case, security.
The immediate, tangible feeling of being safer outweighs the abstract, maybe long-term risk of data misuse.
That seems to be the psychology. And the personal AI guardian is the apex of that trade-off. You're potentially surrendering deep, intimate household privacy for the promise of absolute physical security.
And that data, it's not just sitting there. Hackers are one risk.
Huge risk. Blackmail, identity theft, planning physical attacks, but it's also incredibly valuable to the company that made the robot.
For targeted ads, product development, selling it to data brokers.
All of the above. Your home, your life inside it becomes a data commodity to be monetized.
This leads us straight into what's probably the most ethically fraught question in the sources. Should these personal AI guardians be armed?
Yeah, this is the big one. It shifts the robot from just a monitor and alarm system to a potential autonomous enforcer, making life or death decisions on its own.
And the debate basically falls into two camps: ban them or regulate them.
That's how the material frames it. Groups like the Campaign to Stop Killer Robots advocate for a complete global ban. They see it as a moral red line, a dangerous step towards digital dehumanization.
But others, often in military or tech circles, argue that regulation is the way to go.
Their argument is sometimes that robots could even be more ethical than humans in combat or defense scenarios. No fear, no fatigue, no prejudice. They just follow the rules strictly.
The focus there is on ensuring meaningful human control, right? Though what that actually means is fuzzy.
Very fuzzy, highly contested. You see frameworks like from the U.S. Department of Defense talking about principles for military AI responsibility, equity, traceability, reliability, governability.
But putting armed robots in homes takes this out of the realm of international law and military ethics.
And drops it right into domestic law. Personal property, self-defense laws. It privatizes a debate that's been happening mostly at the state level.
And applying classic ethical frameworks here gets complicated fast, like deontology, the rule-based approach.
Deontology looks at the act itself. Is the act of delegating a lethal decision to a machine inherently wrong regardless of the outcome? Does it violate a fundamental duty to respect human dignity? Does it reduce a person to just a data point for algorithmic elimination?
So a deontological rule might be something absolute, like never fire if there's any chance the target isn't hostile.
Exactly. Strength protects fundamental rights. Weakness can be rigid, might lead to bad outcomes in specific cases.
Versus consequentialism, which is all about the results.
Right. Does deploying armed AI save more lives in the long run? Does it stop home invasions that would have turned violent? If the overall outcome is better, then maybe the action is justified.
So a consequentialist rule might be based on calculating utility. Fire if the expected benefit outweighs the expected harm.
Something like that. Strength. Pragmatic focuses on real-world consequences.
Right.
Weakness can justify terrible acts for supposed greater good, and predicting consequences accurately is incredibly hard.
And the sources make the point that the manufacturer has to choose. They have to program an ethically opinionated machine.
A decision made by engineers in a lab has potential life or death consequences in someone's hallway. That's a heavy responsibility.
There's also that deep concern about human dignity and dehumanization.
Yeah, UN rapporteurs, human rights groups, they argue that having machines make kill decisions fundamentally denigrates the value of human life. It's digital dehumanization.
It matters how the decision is made. A human decision, even flawed, involves grappling with the gravity of it, context, empathy.
Whereas a machine decision is pure computation. Efficient, maybe, but devoid of that human element, that understanding of what's at stake.
And the risk is, if we normalize this kind of dehumanized violence in the home, the place that's supposed to be safest, does that erode respect for life more broadly?
It's a profound question about our values. Where do we draw the line?
Okay, so whether it's armed or not, for this guardian to do anything useful, it has to understand what's happening around it, which brings us to interpreting human social cues.
And this is a massive challenge for AI, telling the difference between friends roughhousing and a real assault, a heated argument versus escalating violence, playful gestures versus genuine threats.
This is the domain of effective computing, right? Emotion, AI.
Exactly. The goal is to build tech that can recognize, interpret, maybe even process human emotions so it can interact more appropriately, maybe even empathetically.
It uses data from lots of sources. Visual cues, facial expressions, body language.
Audio, the tone of voice, maybe even physiological sensors if available, text analysis. Fusing all that data to get a better picture of the human emotional state.
And this is a growing field.
Big market growth. But the sources highlight a critical blind spot in current AI. It's really bad at understanding context, nuance, and social norms.
Like that Johns Hopkins study mentioned, AI models just couldn't interpret social interactions that were obvious to humans.
That's the one. AI is great at pattern recognition. It can learn to identify a smile statistically. But it doesn't understand if it's a happy smile, a sarcastic smile, a nervous grimace. Not without immense context, cultural knowledge, maybe even what philosophers call theory of mind, knowing what others might be thinking or feeling.
True social intelligence is still way off for AI.
Very far off. And this idea that AIs might develop their own norms among themselves, that could be fragile, unpredictable, and maybe totally alien to human values.
And in a security context, this perceptual blind spot is a direct threat, isn't it?
Absolutely. Misinterpreting kids playing leads to false alarms. People get alarm fatigue, they start ignoring it.
Or worse, it fails to act, missing the subtle signs of a real threat, like a burglar moving stealthily, or a victim frozen in fear.
Or it escalates inappropriately, misreading a cultural gesture, or someone having a medical issue, or even just someone reacting fearfully to the robot as aggression.
Plus the whole issue of algorithmic bias.
If the training data is skewed, the AI's interpretations will be too. It could lead to discriminatory outcomes, being more suspicious of certain groups or types of behavior based on biased data.
So it's a paradox. To be truly safe and understand emotion, the AI would need total surveillance, which is ethically problematic.
Right. But even with all that data, it still lacks genuine understanding. It creates this uncanny valley of security. The actions might look right on the surface, but they're based on shallow pattern matching that could break down badly in new or complex situations.
Okay, let's zoom back out again. Beyond the individual home, the sources look at the community level, the mesosystem. What happens when these AI guardians start showing up more widely?
Yeah, adoption in public spaces, businesses using them on campuses, in parks, transit systems, maybe at events.
It'd become a new layer of automated security in shared spaces. Patrolling, monitoring, maybe checking credentials.
That's the vision, but public reaction is likely to be, well, complicated, divided.
Some people might feel safer seeing them around.
Sure, it could be a symbol of enhanced safety for some, but for others, it might feel like a sign of high crime danger. It could actually make them feel less safe.
And perception probably depends a lot on the robot's design. Friendly or intimidating.
And who controls it? A private security firm. People might worry about data exploitation. A government agency. People might worry about civil liberties, surveillance, especially in marginalized communities with histories of being over-policed.
Transparency seems absolutely crucial for any kind of public acceptance.
Totally. And then there's the technical challenge. How do all these different robots, your personal one, the one patrolling the park, the one at the mall, interact? Do they share data, coordinate? Who's in charge when they overlap?
This sounds like it needs multi-agent systems research, maybe hierarchical control.
That's the direction discussed. Supervisor agents setting goals, lower-level agents executing tasks. A division of labor in the robot security world.
But that brings risks too, right?
Yeah.
Communication problems, errors cascading down from a bad high-level decision.
Exactly. And the most likely outcome, realistically, without strong standards and coordination, balkanization.
Meaning
It's
that
fragmented patchwork. You've got your private home system, the gated community system, the corporate campus system, the public park system, all potentially proprietary, different rules, different data, no easy way to coordinate.
which creates systemic weaknesses, exploitable gaps between the bubbles.
Precisely. Paradoxically reducing overall societal security by fragmenting it.
And this fragmentation leads directly to another major issue, the sources flag, the socioeconomic divide. This tech could be a huge destabilizer.
This is critical. AI security gets marketed as a solution, but the sources warn it could become a powerful engine of inequality, reinforcing division.
Because the tech is expensive. The robot itself, maintenance, software subscriptions, data plans.
It's not cheap. It becomes a luxury good, essentially. So society risks splitting into the haves and the have-nots of security.
A protected class, mostly affluent, with 247 automated protection.
Versus everyone else. Security shifts from being ideally a public good accessible to all towards being a private commodity you have to buy. This just amplifies existing disparities.
And this inequality has knock-on effects for the whole system.
Big effects. The visible presence of robots becomes a stark marker of segregation. It stigmatizes areas that don't have robot patrols. It's like algorithmically enforced redlining.
Which breeds resentment, distrust, erodes social cohesion.
You bet. It can fuel crime and unrest in response. The robots themselves could become targets, vandalism, attacks.
So the tech meant to make a few people feel safer ends up making the whole system less stable, by fraying the social contract.
That's the core warning. The sources do discuss potential systemic interventions, ways to mitigate this.
Like what?
Well, universal basic income, UBI, comes up, partly as a way to deal with job losses from automation, generally.
But also maybe as a way to get social license for widespread automation. By preventing mass unrest, it stabilizes the system, which ultimately benefits the tech developers too.
It's a complex dynamic. Another idea is publicly funded models, treating AI security more like a public utility.
Government stepping in to ensure a baseline level of protection for everyone.
It might become a political necessity, maybe public-private partnerships. It's analogous to how public police forces eventually took over from private watchmen centuries ago.
Okay, so integrating AI at the community level also forces communities to grapple with new rules. The science of human rules in action locally.
Balancing safety against privacy, fairness, just general neighborhood harmony, it's going to force tough conversations.
And likely lead to a messy patchwork of local ordinances initially.
Almost certainly. Conflicting rules from town to town. Can my robot record video on the public sidewalk? What about my neighbor's yard? Are there no-go zones? What happens if my robot gets into a conflict with my neighbor's robot? It's a legal minefield.
And these local fights over robot rules could become proxies for other tensions. Class, race.
Easily. Wealthier communities might allow more, while less affluent ones impose tighter restrictions, leading to legal battles that are really about deeper social divisions.
This is why we're seeing community-based AI safety initiatives pop up. Grassroots efforts demanding a say.
Exactly. Pushing for things like AI literacy programs, helping people understand the tech, demanding inclusive design processes, making sure diverse voices are heard before deployment, and insisting on public oversight and transparency about data.
And if these robots start taking on roles that look like policing, the bias issue becomes critical.
Hugely critical. They're just as susceptible to bias as human systems if trained on biased data. Probably more so because they can apply bias systematically and at scale.
So the sources emphasize the need for rigorous bias audits, looking at the data, the model, the outcomes.
Absolutely. Auditing the training data for gaps or overrepresentation, checking the model for hidden proxies for sensitive attributes, using fairness metrics to see if outcomes are equitable across groups, using bias detection tools.
And that black box problem again. If you can't explain why the AI made a decision,
it's incompatible with basic principles of due process. If a robot's action leads to negative consequences for someone, they have a right to know why.
Which fuels the demand for explainable AI, XAI, making it a requirement.
Potentially as a new kind of civil right. An understandable explanation for significant automated decisions seems like a prerequisite for legitimate governance and accountability.
Okay, let's pull back again to the bigger picture. The sources identify one massive, unresolved problem looming over all of this: legal liability.
This might be the single biggest practical obstacle. Who is responsible when an autonomous system screws up and causes harm? Right now, there's a huge accountability vacuum.
Because the chain of causation is so complex. The owner, the manufacturer, the AI developer, the company that supplied the training data, the network operator.
Exactly. If you're harmed, who do you sue? How do you prove fault? It's incredibly difficult. And the sources argue this ambiguity actually benefits the tech companies. It shields them. It externalizes the consequences onto users, onto society. There's arguably a corporate disincentive to push for legal clarity right now.
And existing legal frameworks just aren't cutting it.
They're struggling. Product liability law was designed for, faulty toasters, not for software that learns and changes over time. Negligence law requires proving someone breached a duty of care, but how do you prove that with a black box AI if you can't even pinpoint the specific faulty decision or design choice?
So people are exploring new legal ideas. What's mentioned?
Things like the EU's AI liability directive. They're looking at concepts like strict liability for operators of high-risk AI, meaning if a high-risk AI causes harm, the operator is liable, period. Doesn't matter if they were technically negligent, it shifts the risk.
Well.
Mandatory insurance, like car insurance, but for high-risk AI systems. Developers or operators would have to carry insurance, ensuring there's a pot of money to compensate victims. You could even see a whole new liability as a service industry spring up.
And the really out there idea? Electronic personhood.
Yeah, it's radical and controversial. The idea is to grant sophisticated AIs a limited legal status, like corporate personhood. I'm not saying they're conscious, but creating a legal fiction so the AI itself could be held liable, own assets, be insured. It's one way to try and close that accountability gap.
Okay, beyond the legal knots, this tech is tangled up in geopolitics too. The sources talk about an AI arms race.
Definitely. AI security tech is inherently dual use. It has obvious military applications. And AI is seen as a revolutionary military technology by major powers, the US, China, Russia. China talks about intelligentized warfare.
The war in Ukraine is often described as an AI war lab, testing these concepts.
Gradually, yes. And from a state's perspective, having a large domestic fleet of personal AI guardians is actually a strategic asset.
Oh.
It's a massive distributed sensor network across your own territory. It's a real-world testbed for training and improving autonomous systems. And it gets your population used to interacting with autonomous agents, all potentially advantageous in future conflicts that rely heavily on AI.
So it's a geopolitical minefield. A new kind of arms race, not just between states, but maybe even corporations developing the core AI.
With huge risks, proliferation, accidental escalation, shifts in global power balances, and traditional arms control models don't work well here.
Because you're trying to control software and algorithms, not physical weapons.
Exactly. Software can be copied and spread almost instantly. It's much harder to track and regulate than, say, nuclear materials. It makes the whole situation inherently unstable.
And adding to the instability, there's no global agreement on how to regulate this stuff. We see totally different approaches.
That's right. The EU is going for a risk-based, rights-focused approach with its AI Act. High-risk systems, like armed security robots would likely be, face tough requirements. Pre-market checks, transparency, human oversight, data protection, and they're leaning towards strict liability.
Whereas the U.S. is more
Market-driven, sector-specific, generally pro-innovation, relying more on existing laws and letting different government agencies regulate their specific areas, fewer hurdles before launch, but then you face potential lawsuits later.
And China.
State-led, security-focused. The government actively directs AI development for national goals, including surveillance and social control. AI is tightly integrated with the state. The focus is on state control and data security for the state, with fewer protections for individual liberties against government intrusion.
Three very different philosophies. Must be tricky for global tech companies.
Absolutely. And then you have international bodies, OECD, UN, G7, trying to set high-level principles, promoting ethics, responsible AI, but it's mostly soft law, non-binding guidelines hard to enforce.
So all these impacts, legal, social, geopolitical, they point towards a massive long-term transformation of society and governance, don't they?
That's the unavoidable conclusion from these sources. Autonomous non-state actors, like powerful AI systems or the corporations behind them, challenge the traditional state-centric model of international law.
Global institutions are struggling to keep up, regulating private companies, transnational data flows.
It's a huge challenge. The UN has advisory bodies trying to create global frameworks, align AI with human rights and sustainable development goals, bridge the AI divide between countries. But again, getting binding global agreements is incredibly difficult.
The sources also floated that idea of AI arbitration. Not just using AI in arbitration, but as a model for the AI itself.
Yeah, it's an intriguing conceptual leap. First, the practical side. AI-related disputes are exploding. Courts are slow, often lack technical expertise. So using AI tools to assist in arbitration legal research, data analysis makes sense for efficiency.
But with ethical flags, obviously. Confidentiality, bias, the black box.
Definitely. Groups like the Chartered Institute of Arbitrators, CIARB, have guidelines stressing that human arbitrators must stay in charge, not delegate the actual decision. But the conceptual idea is interesting. Could the AI's own internal conflict resolution when its duties clash work like arbitration, applying conflict of laws principles to weigh its obligations under laws of nature versus society versus ethics?
Like a meta-level reasoning protocol inside the AI.
Potentially. A conflict of rules protocol. It's speculative, but interesting.
And looking even further out, AI integration fundamentally reshapes work, government, the social contract. Automation hits jobs, increases inequality.
Governments start using algorithmic governance, using AI for efficiency delivering services, managing resources, predicting risks. Lots of potential benefits, but also huge risks around transparency, accountability, democratic control.
So the basic deal between citizens and the state needs rethinking.
That's the argument. As AI takes over roles in the economy and security, what are the state's responsibilities? What new rights do citizens need regarding their data, regarding automated decisions? How do we distribute wealth when machines do more work? These are the fundamental questions. Answering them determines if AI leads to a better future or a more fractured, unstable one.
Okay, let's try to synthesize all this. We've covered a huge amount of ground from these sources. The AI Guardian is complex, interconnected, potential for good, but also serious risks.
It forces us to make implicit human rules explicit. We have to encode nuanced human judgment, common sense, ethics into machines.
And that codification, it's a double-edged sword, right?
Exactly. It forces us to confront our own values, our contradictions. That can be good. But it also risks creating rigid, brittle systems that can't handle ambiguity or context the way humans can.
And those feedback loops from the system's perspective seem crucial to remember.
The security-insecurity loop. More tech, more perceived threat, more insecurity, more tech. It feeds on itself.
And the inequality amplification loop. Wealth buys better security, entrenches advantage, fuels resentment, destabilizes the system for everyone.
And these loops drive those negative emergent properties we talked about. Balkanization, automated segregation, legal paralysis, an unstable arms race.
Which brings us back to that core systems idea, purpose. If the system's purpose is just narrowly defined as keep this one owner safe,
then these negative outcomes are almost inevitable. The leverage point is to elevate the purpose. The source is actually, quote, a very broad purpose.
to contribute to a healthy, normal, and prosperous human society and a balanced universe, especially our home, the Earth. That's ambitious.
It is. But the point is, we need to consciously design and govern this technology, not just for immediate security or profit, but for broader goals. Ethics, compassion, sustainability, long-term flourishing for everyone.
Which leads right into the recommendations for how we might actually do that.
Yeah.
How do we steer this thing responsibly?
One key idea is a hierarchical and formally verifiable ethical framework for the AI. Structure the AI's decision-making like a well-run human organization. High-level principles like constitutional rights, human dignity should guide mid-level rules, like legal compliance, which then guide context-specific actions.
And formally verifiable. That sounds technical.
It is. It means using mathematical methods to actually prove that the AI's code adheres to specific ethical properties. For instance, proving mathematically that the system cannot use race as a decision factor. It bridges the gap between abstract ethics and concrete code, makes ethics tangible, auditable, enforceable. Standards bodies like IE are working on this.
Another big one, mandating explainable AI, XAI, for these high-risk systems.
The black box is just too dangerous. It blocks trust, accountability, safety. If an autonomous security robot takes significant action, we need to be able to understand why.
It's a prerequisite for due process, oversight, figuring out who's responsible if it goes wrong.
And alongside XAI, promoting research into value alignment. This is the really hard problem. How do we get AI to actually learn and adopt complex, nuanced human values? It's essential if we want autonomous agents we can truly trust in unpredictable situations.
The sources even apply this kind of systems thinking to that specific query about retiring government officials.
Right. Framing the problem not just as people get old, but as potential systemic rigidity from very long tenures. A fixed retirement age is a blunt tool for that systemic issue.
So that AI doesn't decide who retires.
No. The idea is to use AI to analyze data, economic data, social indicators, policy innovation rates, correlated with how long officials have been in power.
To model the relationship between tenure and the health of the governance system.
Exactly. Identify statistically when the downsides of incumbency tend to outweigh the benefits for the system as a whole. Then, an independent body could use that evidence-based analysis from the AI to propose or adjust rules dynamically.
So AI becomes a tool for understanding and maintaining the vitality of the system, not for controlling individuals.
It's using the same principles, understanding system dynamics, to inform policy in a totally different area. A good illustration.
Okay, wrapping this all up. This deep dive makes it crystal clear. The AI Guardian tech presents profound choices. The promise of safety, control. It's powerful.
But deployed without careful thought, without understanding the system dynamics, it seriously risks accelerating division, chaos, instability. It demands a very conscious balancing act.
Balancing innovation with what? Human dignity? Planetary stewardship?
Yes, steering the tech, not stopping it, guiding it by a purpose higher than just technical or market success.
Integrating ethics and governance from the start, being proactive with bias audits, safety verification, not just reacting after disasters happen.
And it needs a whole-of-society approach.
Yep.
Techies, policymakers, ethicists, the public. Everyone needs to be involved.
And it highlights a stark choice in how we use these powerful underlying technologies: sensors, data analysis, robotics.
We can turn the gaze inward, focus on private security for those who can afford it.
Or we can turn the gaze outward. Use the same tech for collective challenges.
Like environmental monitoring, resource management. AI is already being used to track deforestation, monitor air and water quality, improve climate models, manage energy grids, track endangered species. It gives us unprecedented tools for planetary stewardship.
And the risk implied is, if society pours resources into private guardians while neglecting these shared global challenges,
It suggests our purpose is fundamentally misaligned. We're optimizing for the wrong thing.
this AI guardian then, it's more than just tech. It's a pivotal chapter in how we co-evolve with our tools.
These powerful tools inevitably reshape us, our environment, our rules, our relationships, ourselves.
This one forces us to confront deep fears, question our rules, get really clear about our collective purpose.
We have to wield this power wisely, with foresight, with a commitment to a future that's not just secure in a narrow defensive sense, but actually just equitable, humane, and sustainable.
Because, as the sources powerfully suggest, the rules we write for our machines today
Are, in a very real way, the rules we will all end up living by tomorrow. This deep dive really drives home the complexity, the stakes.
Yeah, it shows that real security isn't just about walls or weapons, digital or otherwise.
It's about the health of the whole system. The rules, the relationships, the feedback loops that this technology plugs into and reshapes.
And maybe the biggest threats in this automated future won't come from outside.
But from the unintended consequences, the systemic fractures created by the technology itself if we're not careful.
Which leaves us with that really provocative final thought for you, the listener. How does your personal definition of security impact the security of everyone else around you? Is true safety found primarily in guarding ourselves from others? Or is it found in building a society where everyone feels fundamentally secure and connected? Something to ponder.
This is DigitView.